Urgently, I bring you news about Putin's throat while Chechen elites are preparing a march on Moscow. A coup in the Caucasus can no longer be stopped. Putin is losing control. A great massacre between the small ethnic groups and Russians has begun. The Caucasus has turned into a powder keg and the fuse has already been lit. At this very moment, cameras on Red Square have captured shocking scenes. Putin, barely conscious, appeared before the people for the last time. The doctors have given up. Moscow is preparing for a regime change. A missile exchange from Kyiv. While Putin fights for every breath, a ballistic hell has descended upon the Kremlin. Ukrainian vengeance struck the dictator at his most vulnerable moment. The Ukrainian armed forces are tallying the final score. Kyiv is in the lead. Our sources warn that this was only a warm-up. All this and more in our program Hotspot. Russia has erupted, Chechnya has declared war on the Kremlin, and Putin has been betrayed by his own. An explosion has thundered that will bury Moscow. The Caucasus has officially slipped out of control. The coup can no longer be stopped. Putin is losing control. This is the beginning of a civil war. The Chechen elites are already sharpening their knives for the final strike on Moscow. Watch for the details. The collapse of Russia is already near.
To answer the call of the times, what must Russia be? Strong. We keep talking about this with you, face to face, all the time.
But these conversations will no longer lead to anything. Putin is losing power and trust. A coup in Moscow is inevitable. In the past 2 years, there has been a significant increase in tensions between the local population and migrants in Russia. Information about conflicts, especially with Chechens, is appearing more and more often on social media. Russians are showing with all their being that migrants are not welcome in Putin's country.
Russian doctor, I accept. Well, local doctor, if you don't agree with this, you can re-establish yourself, find yourself a Russian local doctor, as you wish. Yes, of course, of course. I am a Chechen. And what about you? Why are you kicking me out like that? Working with the military factory. How do you feel about Russians? That's it. So what? I'm not Russian. I don't want to work among Russians. Well, if that's what you want, you can understand this issue. Why can't I work where I want? And why don't you go live in Chechnya?
But as for who and where will still be left to live, that's an open question. The Chechens are preparing a coup.
We will eventually put in Moscow, a government that perfectly suits us.
This is Ruslan Kutayev, a Chechen public figure and president of the Assembly of the Peoples of the Caucasus. He is a proponent of the idea of creating a united North Caucasian state and often makes predictions about the inevitable collapse of the Russian Federation.
We will be the main force determining how events unfold in Moscow. We're just waiting. We're waiting for the main event. We're waiting for the moment when chaos begins and when the scramble for power starts.
According to Kutayev, in order for Islamists to seize power in Moscow, it's necessary to wait just a little longer until the political and economic situation in Russia deteriorates enough.
And now, when it's time to act in Russia, we will act. And only with our approval will the authority that governs Russia be established. Only with us, because Russia has its own traditions. Whoever takes the capital takes the country. And in the capital, no one will govern and no one will come to power without coordinating with us. And we can say this confidently because we have grounds for it.
Although the information space is overflowing with rumors about an imminent change of power, there are currently no real signs of an immediate coup in Russia. Thus, they tend to ignore the critical mass of negative factors: prolonged military miscalculations, systemic corruption, and economic decline. It is precisely these factors, together with a hidden split among the elites, that form a solid foundation for the upcoming political destabilization.
It is extremely difficult to say when this will happen. I would still strongly link and associate this. This represents a very real and significant possibility of a major escalation of certain internal processes, following the eventual passing of Vladimir Putin, or perhaps in connection with various types of strategic military operations. Following his eventual overthrow and the subsequent chaos, there will be frequent palace coups and a constant struggle between rival successors. As these internal conflicts intensify, the southern ethnic groups will truly start to assert their independence and rise up against the central authority.
It is no secret that the Russian economy has long been heading for the bottom. Already this fall, the country could see a repeat of the 1917 situation, warns communist leader Gennady Zyuganov. Economists note that Russia is facing a typical wartime crisis. Rising military spending, a budget deficit, increasing prices for fuel and food.
Putin recently, when answering questions, he himself admitted that the Russian economy is in a very difficult state, which most likely has further encouraged the Chechen people and other Caucasian groups are being called to stand up and raise their voices in defiance against the oppression that has been imposed upon them by the Moscow government, at least within the borders of their own historical territories.
A crisis in Russia could erupt at any moment, and will Putin be able to hold on to power then? The question remains open. The shock was caught on camera. The whole world was shaken by what was seen on Red Square. Putin is on his deathbed. The May 9th parade was the last one. Doctors are in shock. The deadly illness has entered its final stage. The hunt for the weakening dictator is on. Who will pull the trigger? The conspiracy has entered its decisive phase. Watch for all the details.
Swollen and visibly aged. That's how Putin appeared at the May 9th parade, sparking a new wave of discussions about his health and growing paranoia inside the Kremlin.
Well, that's just nonsense. Some kind of rubbish.
Journalists from the Daily Mail paid attention to the Russian dictator's appearance. The publication writes about swollen cheeks, a noticeably aged face, and an appearance that is becoming increasingly difficult to hide, even behind the official Kremlin imagery.
Frightening and paranoid, Russian President Vladimir Putin is now facing even more serious questions regarding his clearly poor state of health, especially after he was recently seen with a significantly swollen and noticeably aged face.
Well, it's not just about his appearance. On social media and among political commentators, the dictator's behavior also drew attention. In the footage, it was noticeable how he nervously fidgeted with his fingers, periodically clenching his hand under the sleeve of his jacket, and appeared as tense as possible. The Daily Mail provides a comment regarding the bunker dweller's appearance.
A frail man stands, bent under the weight of a burden he can no longer lift.
No enthusiasm, no celebration.
Either Putin himself is afraid, or he is being intimidated, and his fear is being stoked, which leads to paranoia.
He looks lonely and isolated inside his security bubble.
Such discussions about the Kremlin leader's health have arisen more than once before. At the end of last year, after Putin met with the head of the Russian movement Healthy Fatherland, journalists discussed his hands, noting withered skin and signs that many described as age-related changes. At that time, there were also suggestions of possible chronic pain. And this is far from an isolated case. During one of his video addresses, which lasted almost 8 minutes, Putin did not move his hands or fingers even once.
This could be the result of editing, where motionless hands were added to the body. Or the reason could lie in the dictator's illness or a desire to hide his nervousness.
But now the situation looks much more telling. Because it's not just Putin himself who is changing, the entire atmosphere around him is changing as well. History knows many examples when dictators aged rapidly before the fall of their regime or their own death. And the reason for this, according to the monitoring group Crimean Wind, is as follows. Chronic stress, isolation, and the constant fear of losing control over the system. And the current parade on Red Square is proof of that. The victory mania really looked pathetic. There was an unusual lack of displays of power. The show itself lasted only about 45 minutes. And the center of Moscow was essentially covered by a dome of security and electronic warfare.
President Vladimir Putin, you have done a great job.
Instead of a nationwide celebration, we got the personal special operation of a deeply frightened, aging dictator. To this
is added Putin's wild fear. And it's not just about Ukrainian strikes, but also the growing likelihood of a conspiracy or assassination attempt from his own elites.
Putin has played himself into a corner.
Putin is, of course, a paranoid, but his fears are justified. He knows from Russian history that there is one thing that leads to major changes, and sometimes even to revolutions. A bad war.
And the culmination of what's happening is his rapidly falling approval rating. According to VTCOM, the approval rating of the Russian dictator has dropped to 70%, and trust has fallen to 75%. At the same time, the share of those who disapprove of the president's work and do not trust him is growing. More than 18% and more than 20% respectively. These are the highest figures since the start of the full-scale invasion.
Well, this is already the end.
That is precisely why security measures around Putin are being tightened. His travel routes are being restricted and control is being strengthened. His closest circle is being put into a state of virtual isolation. And the more actively the Kremlin tries to demonstrate control, the more obvious the opposite becomes. The system is becoming increasingly vulnerable, which means the great collapse of the great ones is not far off.
A verdict delivered live on air. Ukrainian Flamingo missiles dealt such a crushing blow to the Kremlin's pride that the federal channels were choking with rage. Solovyov broke into a scream, the Kremlin is in a panic. While their air defense let strikes through, Flashpoint is ramping up production of smart missiles capable of reaching even the most protected bunkers. How did the Ukrainian defense industry manage to scare the entire Russian propaganda machine? Watch.
A missile breakthrough. Ukraine is scaling up its own production of long-range weaponry in close cooperation with international companies. In 4 years, Kyiv has increased weapons production by 35 times, shifting to high-tech models. Some of the key developments include cruise missiles, the Flamingo, the Grom-2 complex, the Neptune anti-ship missiles, and drones. This makes it possible to effectively strike oil refineries, logistics, and the occupiers' headquarters. Ukrainian missiles have long been terrorizing the Russians as they can reach deep into Putin's country. This is a strike on Cheboksary. The FP-5 Flamingo cruise missile covered a distance of over 1,500 kilometers.
Technical specifications: target engagement range over 3,000 kilometers, warhead effective radius up to 100 kilometers.
It should be noted that in terms of technical specifications, the Flamingo surpasses its American counterpart, the Tomahawk cruise missiles. Based on the comprehensive testing we have conducted, the results clearly indicate that everything is functioning just as we expected.
The mass production. The FP-7 ballistic missile, which proved its effectiveness in February 2026, will enter mass production starting in May. The plan is to produce 100 units per month, provided normal funding levels. The FP-7 is the equivalent of the American Attack-MS.
This makes it possible to keep the operational rear of the Russian occupation forces under fire control. I would note that even after the United States supplied HIMARS with a target engagement range of about 70 kilometers, it seriously complicated the logistics capabilities of the occupying army. They were forced to move their field ammunition depots and field fuel and lubricant depots to a distance of more than 100 kilometers.
A more powerful version, the FP-9, is intended for strikes deep in the enemy's rear, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. Its codification and serial production are expected in the summer of 2026.
It's no coincidence that, given the increased threats to Ukraine's enemy from the use of cruise and ballistic missiles, including strikes on the territory of Moscow and the Moscow region, the occupiers are currently constructing a fourth line of air and missile defense systems. We're talking about more than 100 surface-to-air missile systems. The Panzer S-1 systems, which according to the Russians are supposed to protect the skies over Moscow and the Moscow region.
And furthermore, Ukraine has officially announced that it has achieved parity with German technologies. According to Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov, the Ukrainian armed forces already have missiles in service that are not inferior to Taurus in range and...
When we evaluate the concept of effectiveness, we are essentially measuring the degree to which a specific action or process successfully produces the desired result and achieves its intended purpose. We are no longer dependent on the political will of the German leadership when it comes to making decisions about strikes on the territory of the occupier's country.
Kyiv is also actively using domestically produced Sapsan Neptune missiles to strike targets in Russia, confirming their effectiveness.
The technical and tactical characteristics of the Sapsan surpass their Russian counterparts, And this allows to create the so-called principle of the missile spear, meaning the inevitability of strikes on the territory of the occupying country as a mirrored response to terrorist attacks from the side of the Russian Federation.
Over the past 4 years, the Ukrainian defense industrial complex has made a real technological leap, transforming itself from an outdated Soviet base into one of the most innovative defense industries in the world. While the Kremlin is forced to beg for shells from North Korea and drones from Iran, Ukraine is scaling up its missile retaliation program.
The Ukrainian side has already surpassed the capabilities of the Russian Federation in delivering strikes on enemy territory using fixed-wing drones. Even the occupiers themselves admit this. In addition, the development of cruise and ballistic missiles allows the Ukrainian side to seriously impact the economic potential of the occupying country when it comes to further financing the active phase of hostilities in Ukraine.
Also, more than 500 domestic companies are working daily on the creation of the latest UAVs. Today, the capacities of the Ukrainian defense industry allow for the production of more than 2 million drones per year. Urgent liberation of Mariupol. It happened. Our forces broke through. The Kremlin lost control of the skies. Putin's generals grabbed their heads in despair. Swarms of Ukrainian drones filled the sky. It was truly Judgment Day. How did Ukrainian drone operators turn the much-vaunted Russian electronic warfare into a pile of useless junk? And why did Putin's army of the future prove powerless against the genius of Ukrainian engineers? Watch this.
This is a strike on the Russian army's unmanned systems command post in the occupied part of Kherson region. Over the past month, such strikes have been happening more and more frequently. In addition to air bomb strikes, the Ukrainian armed forces are systematically carrying out deep strikes on storage depots for Russian UAVs and ammunition, as far as 200 kilometers deep, both on Russian territory and on temporarily occupied Ukrainian territory. Due to the effective strikes by Ukrainian drones, the Russian army is being forced to move ammunition and FPV drone depots deep into the rear, which complicates logistics.
Agents of Atesh from among the servicemen of the armed forces of the Russian Federation report a radical change in the enemy's logistics. Depots with FPV drones and ammunition are rapidly being moved deeper away from the line of contact. The loss of warehouse facilities forced the command to decide to organize depots deep in the rear. 6 months ago, ammunition and UAVs were kept as close to the front as possible to reduce delivery time. Now, trucks unload their cargo much farther from the front line. Because of this, the assembly chain before a strike becomes longer and the routes become more extended and vulnerable.
The number of Ukrainian drones at the front has changed. Their effectiveness and range of use have also increased, allowing them to strike targets that were previously out of reach. Currently, active strikes are being carried out on the highways connecting Berdyansk and Mariupol. Ukrainian drones are operating as part of an air interdiction operation. They are targeting Russian ground lines of communication.
Russian military bloggers expressed concern on May 10th. This was in response to recent Ukrainian footage showing Ukrainian hardnet drones freely flying over the highway. The T-0509 Mariupol-Donetsk, also known as the H-10 highway near occupied Mariupol, targeting Russian fuel tankers and other military vehicles.
The strikes are mainly carried out by Hornet drones. Ukrainian fighters may be able to fully automate the Hornet drones within the next 6 to 12 months.
The simple fact that the official armed forces of the nation of Ukraine, and above all their specialized unmanned aerial vehicle units, are consistently able to target and strike this critical highway infrastructure, well, in general, this just confirms the strategic emergence and full-scale implementation of these new capabilities. The beginning of the widespread use of drones. Possessing this level of advanced technical quality, which effectively means they are fully capable of successfully striking and disrupting the operational rear of Russian troops.
Russian electronic warfare can jam Ukrainian Hornet drones only if they are not using Starlink or do not have time to automatically lock onto the target. Ukrainian pilots patrol the roads up to 160 kilometers deep from the line of combat engagement. And now the military supply of Mariupol and other frontline cities is under the full control of the Ukrainian armed forces, which creates a huge problem for the occupying troops.
A military blogger expressed concern that Ukrainian drones, supported by Starlink and with a flight range of up to 200 kilometers, are reaching the highways. The M14 Mariupol-Berdyansk-Melitopol-Henichesk is a key Russian supply route along the coast of the Sea of Azov, connecting to newly occupied Crimea.
Well, this in general significantly changes the nature of the hostilities, because at the very least in the very near future, it can be expected that the supply of Russian troops on the front line, on the line of fighting, will be seriously hampered.
Recently, Russia and Ukraine have focused on striking and destroying UAV production facilities. The goal is to destroy the drones before they are even built. And in this matter, Ukraine seems to be having more success.
In recent months, Ukraine has intensified its long-range strike campaign against Russian drone manufacturing infrastructure. One of the largest attacks took place on April 19, 2026, when Ukrainian forces struck the Atlant Aero plant in Taganrog, Rostov region. The strikes on the Atlant Aero plant were part of a broader campaign against Russia's drone production network. Later in April, Ukrainian forces struck the Basamat Special Purpose Center in the occupied Zaporizhia region. This facility is engaged in the development of drones, robotic systems, and electronic warfare technologies. There have also been repeated strikes on the Progress plant, located in the Tambov region. This facility manufactures sensors and electronics used in modern Russian drones.
The supply batteries are seriously undermining the Russian army's ability to fight effectively. And strikes deep into the occupied territories and the destruction of depots are creating good conditions for the deoccupation of Ukrainian territory.
A bloody repeat of the Siberian hell. Disaster has struck Russia, making people's hair stand on end. The deadly reptile is already here, and panic among farmers has reached its peak. But the real nightmare began when people in uniform got involved. The region is cordoned off, and the farm turns into a graveyard in just a few hours.
Please take a moment to look at the details shown here on the screen. It is important to examine these elements carefully to ensure you understand the information being presented. By reviewing these specific points, you will gain a much better insight into the subject matter we are discussing right now.
Farmers in Kuzbas are sounding the alarm over the mass slaughter of livestock.
They won't let me take the cattle out, they won't let me sell it or even send it for processing.
Residents are shocked that animals are being seized from the farmer and that they are being forced to urgently vaccinate the remaining livestock with an unknown drug. There are severe consequences for disseminating or sharing any information about what really happened.
If anyone reveals anything, everyone will be sent to the investigative committee.
There are growing concerns about a possible outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease, and the authorities are not providing clear explanations.
For the first time ever, the entire region was mobilized and these settlements were assigned. The whole region, all 10 veterinary stations came to our aid.
And then will it be the same as in Novosibirsk?
Do you know what kind of documents?
While officials are coming up with excuses, restrictions are already being imposed on the sale and export of livestock. But there is still no official announcement of a quarantine. And
what are you going to diagnose now? What'll it show? No, it's on the edge. It's there. What will it show? You don't even know yourself what it will show, because you don't even know yourself what you're diagnosing. Honestly, as a human being, just like you said, this is my life. This is what I live for.
I have loans, I have debts. I only survive because of them. And many people here live like that. In
the village of Tarasovo, unknown people arrived supposedly to vaccinate cattle allegedly sick with pasteurellosis. They did not show any documents for the drugs.
Show us the vaccine. We'll look up on the internet what kind of vaccine it is. What is this vaccine for? You'll give the shots today, and tomorrow our cattle will all die.
At the enterprise in the Promyshlenovsky district, the sanitary regime has been strengthened. Additional headcount examinations have been organized. Constant monitoring of the epizootic and sanitary situation is being carried out. In
the Kemerovo region, reports are coming in about the mass slaughter of livestock at the Vaganovo dairy complex. Around 2,000 head of cattle.
So the workers say they set up cots for us and won't let us leave. I call another person, he works at the complex. I ask him, when is your next shift? He says, they moved me to the garages altogether. I say, what do you mean they moved you to the garages? He says, that's just how it is.
Officially, the company says it's due to nodular dermatitis.
Nodular dermatitis is an infectious disease of cattle, accompanied by fever, swelling of the subcutaneous connective tissue and organs, the formation of skin nodules, and lesions of the eyes, as well as the mucous membranes of the respiratory and digestive tracts. The mortality rate for nodular dermatitis in cattle does not exceed 10%. At the same time, the disease causes economic damage, economic losses.
We went at night and there were KAMAZ trucks leaving from there, people dressed in white clothing. They started waving their hands at us as we got closer, and I realized they were going to arrest us. The KAMAZ trucks were being loaded.
Loaded KAMAZ trucks covered with branches were leaving Vaganovo. The woman suspects that the bodies of slaughtered animals might be inside.
For the suckers. Now these suckers will let them vaccinate their livestock with some unknown, completely unclear vaccine. You see, it's all aimed at the suckers. Put locks on your gates. No one will break them, the vets won't come with an angle grinder to cut them off. Or the police won't be breaking the locks on your barns where the livestock are kept. No one is going to do that.
But as history shows in Putin's Russia, they're capable of even worse. Meanwhile, the price of milk in the Promyshleny district has already dropped, and another decrease is expected starting May 18th. Farmers are worried about the fate of their employers, who for many are the only source of income.
Lizard, over there they talk among themselves saying it's a lizard. Now they're saying it's posteriles, already over there it's posteriles. And now dermatitis has appeared from somewhere, you see already dermatitis, some kind. Now it's not Novosibirsk, it's like in Krasnoyarsk. So this is how they confuse people, you see, treating them like fools.
Residents of Kuzbas are afraid of a repeat of the incident that happened in the Novosibirsk region in March. Back then, they also seized and destroyed all the livestock.
At that time, we had a herd of 600 Herefords. That's marbled beef. 220 sheep. 2 days later, on March 20th, all our livestock. The cattle and sheep were seized and destroyed. Almost 2 months have passed. To this day, we have not received any compensation for the seized livestock.
The damage amounted to more than 150 million. And the documents regarding the disease were never provided. But take a look at the documents that were submitted to the court. The cows seized from farmers in the Novosibirsk region were allegedly found to have non-pastorellosis.
Since the Veterinary Administration filed a lawsuit against me, we finally learned from the case materials about our situation. That there is a disease in the Novosibirsk region, specifically as follows from the materials of my case, in the Kupinsky district, foot and mouth disease.
Currently, the South African strain Set1 is spreading across Russia. This could have been caused by a poor quality batch of vaccine in which the virus cells did not die.
Everyone, quickly, come on, quickly. Do you understand? The Novosibirsk team also came in January and started vaccinating. The animals, Svetlana Panina talked about this. Minus 40 degrees, they're injecting the animals, and the injection freezes in the syringes. So basically everything was done in a rush. In
late March, the Kemerovo Veterinary Service reported vaccinating cattle against foot and mouth disease. At the same time, the animals could have been vaccinated with the same vaccine as the cows in the Novosibirsk region. In the capital of Siberia, after the vaccinations, a mass outbreak of pastorellosis began. But people don't believe it, that there really was an outbreak of infection. They are convinced that it was a plan by officials to destroy the business.
According to current regulations, when Rosokosnadzor detects a particularly dangerous livestock disease, some kind of epizootic, for example, foot and mouth disease, they are required, once again, to report this information within 24 hours. They must send it to the central office of Rosokosnadzor, which in turn is required to post it on the Episodic Situation website, as well as notify the World Organization for Animal Health, which is located in Paris and of which the Russian Federation is a member.
They watched Russia 1 on TV, voted for United Russia and Putin, but when they needed help, they were simply abandoned. And that's how it is with everything, under the Putin regime.
Finland is one step away from pulling back. President Stubb is issuing Putin an ultimatum. The Northern Front is heating up. The world is holding its breath in anticipation. Finland has officially entered a state of combat readiness, a trap for the Kremlin. How and when will Europe's steel fist strike the Russian Federation? Watch. The president of Finland, Alexander Stubb, believes that it's time to start negotiations with Russia.
If US policy toward Russia and Ukraine does not align with Europe's interests, and I believe that's the case, then we must act directly.
Stubb does not know exactly when the negotiations will begin.
We have discussed this issue with European leaders who are initiating contacts, but we do not know yet.
The EU High Representative Kaja Kallas is confident that Putin is in a weaker position than ever before.
The pressure, primarily from Ukraine, is increasing. It should be noted that the capabilities of the Russian economy at this point no longer meet the needs of the Russian army. If Ukraine's defense forces and intelligence community continue to carry out active operations, striking legitimate military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation, this will have the most serious consequences for the Russian economy. At the
same time, according to Kallas, Russia is still not ready for real negotiations to end the war as it continues to put forward maximalist demands.
The Russian dictator, in fact, has no other options. He is cornered. If he agrees to Ukraine's terms, that would accordingly mean admitting defeat and failing to achieve even the tactical objectives of the so-called special military operation. Noticing the statements of the Russian dictator, there are no longer any questions about denazification or demilitarization. Everything now boils down exclusively to control only over the territory of Donetsk region.
The High Representative of the EU is convinced that negotiations should only begin after Europeans agree among themselves on what to discuss with the Russians.
If we take into account Merck's statements, they include the following. A statement that Ukraine should de jure renounce the occupied territories. In other words, there is no longer any talk of recognizing the territorial integrity of our country. These statements sounded discordant against the backdrop of, accordingly, other statements by the Prime Minister of Poland about the possibility of a Russian invasion directly into Poland and into the territories of several Baltic countries.
Due to drone strikes, both on the occupiers' logistics and on their personnel, the Russian army is suffering enormous losses, which makes it vulnerable to Ukraine. That's all for now. And for more fiery news from the front, tune in to the next episode.